I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander. And today we'd like to talk to you about the courage to face change. One of the realities of our life is that we are all going to be faced with a variety of changes and challenges that come. And those two words, courage and change, go together really very well, don't they, Iris?
Yes, they do. It's somewhat a dichotomy, but we really like change. We just think we don't like change. And change brings all the exciting things into our lives. So if we can just accept the fact that, yes, change is vitally necessary, and it's what we make of it, then we can face change more surely.
Right. The importance of change in our lives is really tremendously important. And I think a lot of us believe that changing circumstances or situations are going to either make us happy or sad. But in fact, changing circumstances just change the events of our lives or the occurrences in our lives. But the way that we respond to those changes is really always up to us, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And different people respond in different ways. But if we look at the lives of others and at our own lives, we can see that our very happiest moments have occurred because there's been a change in our lives. Because without change, it would be very static and life would not be all that exciting. So we should make life an adventure. We can make life an adventure and not dread change, but anticipate it. And just to see what happens and know that we're in control. We had our meetings at the church for 4 or 5 years on take back your power. Well, we can do that. We can take back our power and live our lives according to our own dictates, not just what happens, happenstance.
Mm-hmm. What happens, happens. You know, and we talk a lot about that the circumstances and situations in any individual's life are what they are, and people need to begin from the point of where they are. And sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're glad. All kinds of things happen in our lives, but the way that our minds operate determine how it is that event affects us. And also, you touched upon a really important issue, and that is that the greatest growth that we have as persons, the greatest growth that we have in life, comes through the changes that take place. And if we really look at what's happening from a physiological stance, from a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, and of course we spend a lot of time, you and I, in our counseling work and at the church and in the other work that we do, talking about the integration of this mind, body, spirit concept and the understanding that all of those aspects, mind, body, and spirit, are constantly bringing us change after change after change after change. And one of the things you've heard me say so often in lectures is, if you don't believe in change, just look in the mirror. And you understand that the universe and that divine life is trying to tell us and remind us that change is really a positive part of the process of growth. And it's through change that we come to know ourselves better. It's through change that we come to trust life more. It's through change that we're able to have and embrace the happiness that we all want. Now, that doesn't mean that these changes will always be enjoyable at the time that we're experiencing them. But the fact is that change prompts us, calls us, and pushes us to grow.
Yes, and then when we do allow ourselves to grow, and when we accept, yes, this has happened, and yes, I can get on with my life, whatever that change might be, then our faith is always justified. And that's a very lovely thought to know that it is justified. And people will say, well, I don't know why I ever dreaded that so much, or they wonder why they had such trepidation at the idea of change. But it can be our most beautiful times occur because of a prior change, don't they?
Absolutely. You know, in our counseling work, we spend a lot of time, especially today, and in what we're experiencing, and certainly 10 years ago, with the economic changes that took place in the world, with a lot of people changing their employment, whether they like it or not. And so often when people come to us and they're hurt and they're devastated and they're destroyed by a change that's taken place in their work environment that they haven't anticipated, they become paralyzed and fearful. And we see that all also in relationships. We see relationships change, and we see that not only with intimate relationships of husbands and wives and those who are together, but we also see it in the family life, because as children grow, then mothers and fathers change their role, and children change their role. And so often we see people who are in crisis because of the change, and they're in crisis because of the fact that they don't believe that they have the ability to cope with the change. They don't know what to do with the change. And if I go back to those who have lost a job, and you've had this in your counseling work so often, people come and they say, I've lost my job, and I've been so good, and I've given so much to my job, and I've been so faithful, and look how they've treated me, and look what's happened. And so we begin this process of negative thought, when in fact, as we lose a job, then another one's going to come. And the real positive aspect of this life that we have when we look at change is to understand that as one thing moves out or changes in its manifestation or experience, it creates room for something else to come in. But if we fill our hearts and our minds with confusion and despair and disbelief and anger and the negative emotions and feelings that we have, then we really begin to walk down a road that's very dangerous. And before we get away from this, I want to really stress the fact that there's no problem at all having negative feelings immediately after a negative event in our lives. We're not talking at all about denial, and we're not at all talking about people having a Pollyanna kind of an attitude if you do experience a negative loss or a negative change. But the key is that once we experience that grief or that shock or that hurt, then we need to begin to examine our thought process and determine how long it is that we need to go through the grieving or the sadness or the anger and come out of that in the way that is going to be the most positive for us and for those around us.
Yes, and leave the hopelessness behind. And I know that's easier said than done, but it's like putting one foot after the other. Some writer once said, one bird at a time. And that's the idea, to just do one thing at a time, and then we'll very soon be into a whole new modality of life. And we've both seen people's lives change so that they are so hopeless. But then when they are able, through faith, to be hopeful, then good things happen. And no one wants to hire someone who seems so down and out. So, and people I think people instinctively know that, so they put their best foot forward. But life is really exciting because of change. And I know there's been lots of changes in your life, and certainly there has been in mine. And we fall in that same category, perhaps, of at the time thinking it seems like a hopeless situation. But I would just like to say to those who are listening that there is no such thing as true hopelessness. There's always hope. And there's always something new just around the corner. There's something waiting for every person, whether if they're looking for a relationship because they've lost someone from their life, or work, or whatever it is, or even those people who want children so badly and they're not able to have them. Well, very often when they give up hope, then they do, or they're able to have their babies. And I've had several friends who have adopted and then had their own children come, just because they stopped being so stressed out. So all those are examples of how life will change for us and with us as we change mentally our attitude.
Absolutely. And it does come back to mind. And it comes back to how our minds operate in the face of change or adversity or difficulty, or even positive aspects of life, how our minds operate and how we think. And again, once we come out of the negative or the hurt or the pain, then we have a choice. And our choice is to be there forever, or be there for a long time, or be there for a short time. But the choice is always ours. And in our work, both you and I have worked a lot with people at the end of life. And I just think of so many people who have been so devastated by a diagnosis that is terrible by any stretch of the imagination. And yet as they come through that experience, some of them have had positive and wonderful outcomes. Others have gone through the process of death. And through that process, they come out in a totally different place. And I just am thinking of someone, and I won't name her because she's gone on to the other side now, but you and I know her well, who was in our fellowship and came to us for counseling. And she had come to us because she had a diagnosis of terminal cancer. And she was so devastated at the time, so terribly devastated. And yet out of the devastation, in that 6 months that she had, and that we saw her, she came from being totally devastated into a place where she was able to re-embrace her family, reestablish commitments, be very peaceful, and at the end of that process, had a wonderful, wonderful positive experience where even the medical professionals marveled at how she was able to cope with the pain. Well, she coped with the pain because she had come so far from her suffering to where she was at that point in time. And on a less traumatic level, we've seen people come out of lost jobs and lost relationships, and people that have had financial difficulties and reverses. And you and I have seen little things and big things, but it always comes back to the fact that we start by changing our way of thinking in small and little ways. And one thought at a time, we begin to work with people. People begin to look at the change, and they begin to see it in a different way. And then they come to the other side. And then there are always the other people, as we know, that just stay there for a long time. So.
And then when that central person is centered and happy and accepting, then it's so much easier for the family, and that's such a blessing that they are. Karma is, K-A-R-M-A, karma is discussed and believed in the East, always has been. But now it's more and more prevalent, the thought is, in the West. And karma is the law of cause and effect. As you sow, so shall you reap. And it's not that people are being punished. Karma doesn't mean we're being punished. Well, you know this, but I'm saying it so that if anyone who is listening wonders, well, what do we really mean by karma? Well, we mean that as you sow, so shall you reap. But it's not that we're being punished in that way. And God doesn't judge us, we judge ourselves. And God is love. God doesn't send bad things onto people. So karma is simply a playoff of what we do, then comes back to us. And the good things that we do too come back to us. And the people in our lives, we're drawn together by hate or love. And so the people in our lives, we're very fortunate to have those persons whom we've known in other lives, and then they come back again to us, and it's such a blessing. And sometimes we just see people on the street and resonate to them, and that means, I think, it means we're resonating to someone we've known at another time, and that's one of life's nicest dividends, isn't it?
The connectiveness, the issue of life and how it changes. That's one of the issues of change as well. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
We would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
Before time gets away from us, we want to touch on this topic that we spoke about before the break, which has to do with punishment. You know, and so many times people think that when there's a negative change or a negative challenge or something that happens, what did I do, or am I being punished? And the other thing I think we want to touch on in the last half of the program is the fact, this idea too that you touched on before, that really the consequences of what's happened in our lives depends upon us. There is no punishment for what's happening, but there is an effect for those things that we have done or those things that we have thought. And of course, thinking creates for us the environment in which we live. And so often we say we live in our minds and not in the world. And so often we'll think that something negative has happened and we're being punished because of it. But what really happens is we punish ourselves because we believe that. And the other aspect of that I want to touch on is that, as always, we're never talking about anyone changing their religion or faith tradition. We think that all faiths have value and worth to all people. But the principles that we talk about are universal and can be applied to all people. So if some of the things that we talk about are different to people, we're not doing it and we're not sharing any of these ideas in trying to change anyone's religion. That's not what we're about at all. We're about trying to change the way people think about their lives and become more productive and positive and empowering. So having said that, we don't really get punished, do we?
No, we don't. And we don't even punish ourselves, although we do punish ourselves when we do. But if we're wise, we don't. We just pick up and go on. And most people live with far greater courage than they ever think they would be able to. Isn't that interesting? And I know that that's true because I've seen people face insurmountable odds, and they do it courageously. Where before any incident occurred, they would say, "Well, I couldn't face that. There's no way I could live through the loss of a child, the loss of various types of loss." But we can. And the human spirit is indomitable. And we have to know that we are. And those who are listening, who are facing problems right now, must surely know that there is boundless help for them. And one way they can achieve help is through their own meditation and prayer time. And we say prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening. And truly it is. And when we take the time, and it wouldn't matter what our religious faith, as you said earlier, it wouldn't matter. And we're certainly not trying to change people into thinking our way. But meditation can be fit into any religion and is. It's more and more prevalent in the world. 3/4 of the world's people meditated statistics showed long ago, and now more and more are. But if we just take the time to center ourselves and be quiet, we can face change far more courageously, can't we?
Absolutely. And that centering aspect does bring us the courage that we need. And just before we get back to the meditation issue, you touched on a really important thing and a concept, and that's the idea that as change comes into our lives, we have the ability to see that change in a positive way and to put it aside and allow ourselves to go into a quiet place. And that meditation or that centering state that you spoke about is a simpler way to a simple way to do that. And as we go into that place, then the change in the circumstance begins to move aside from our thinking, and we move ourselves into neutral, if you will, and we're able to listen, and we're able to understand that we can deal with these circumstances and situations that we believe that we never could. So many people, just as you said, don't believe that they can go through it, but once they've gone through it, they will say, "I didn't believe that," and they can see through the change that they are stronger than they believed that they were. And so that strength comes forth, and it comes forth through the experience. But back to the meditation aspect, in our society, especially in the West and today's world, it's very difficult for us to be quiet. It's very difficult for us to be apart. It's very difficult for us to be at peace with ourselves. And yet we see that as a very fundamental part of the philosophy that we teach. And we also see that people who are able to do this are able to live longer, happier, healthier, more balanced lives in mind, body, and spirit. And it's very interesting to see that happen. And meditation, when we think about it, is not really necessarily sitting in the lotus position in a corner. People think about that when we draw upon the Eastern philosophy.
Yes.
But so often we can go into a meditative state, as I do and you do, in the midst of a board meeting, or as we come into a very challenging situation. So meditation simply means that ability to come into a quiet place of centering within ourselves. And it takes some practice. And certainly it takes some practice for the Western mind that isn't accustomed to it and isn't used to it. And especially the Western theological and religious mind that's used to prayer. We're used to talking to God.
Tell God.
Lots of chatter, chatter, chatter. And we're not at all negating that, because prayer is very valid. But meditation is just that, becoming still and becoming quiet and centering. And it's a little bit like our mothers used to tell us to count 10 or take a deep breath. Those are centering techniques that are akin to entering into a meditative state, aren't they?
Yes, and when we know that prayer goes out as light, then we pray in a positive way, in a more positive way, and we don't beg God or tell God but we just praise God and praise the situation. And when we pray in a positive way like that, then it makes us feel better, and more light is created. Everything is light and darkness, so more light is created. And clairvoyantly, that light can be seen, and it does work. We know that it works. It works in healing. It works in healing mind, body, and spirit. So when we can be assured in that fashion, then we're more apt to be effective in our meditation and in our prayer work. I would like to say too that Western bodies were not made for the lotus position, and it's good for people to sit in a chair or to sit straight, to not try to sit in the lotus position. I once attended a workshop with a large group of people, like 30-some people, and one man happened to be a psychologist from LA, and he called me after we'd come home from the workshop, and it was a week workshop, and he said, are your legs hurting? Do you have a problem with your legs? And I said, no, what do you mean? And he said, well, the veins in my legs are broken. And I had told him during the workshop, don't sit in the lotus position too long. Sit there for a few moments and then change your position. Mm-hmm. But he wanted to do that. But it's best that we not torture our bodies, that we be comfortable. The idea is to be very comfortable and to keep the spine straight, but it wouldn't matter if we're lying down, standing on our head or whatever. But if our spine is straight, then the energy goes up and down the spine, and we know that.
Right. The techniques, we have this terrible problem in the West with techniques. People tell us you have to do this way and that way. And meditation is something that there is no way to do it that's right and only right. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is there are very few things that there's only one way to do and one way to think. And so we encourage people to think in different ways and to be creative and embrace different concepts. And so absolutely, the meditation doesn't have to do with the physical technique. It has to do with what's happening within the person and the ability that we have to quiet ourselves. And that ability to quiet ourselves can give us tremendous courage and strengthen us. It's amazing to me how many people can't be quiet and can't be apart for any given period of time. And of course, in our counseling work, we find that very often, that people are very uncomfortable. And that's really an indication that there's a need, and that need needs to be met. Yeah. And so and perhaps that's a change that needs to take place. And the changes that we have in our lives can be changes that we choose as well. Mm-hmm. And those changes have to be taken and made sometimes in a very bold way. And sometimes we find that we need to make changes in the people that surround us in our lives, and that's a very difficult thing to do sometimes.
Yes, it is. And nothing gives us more pleasure than the children in our lives and the children we see around us. And yet the very bottom line is change for those children, because otherwise they wouldn't grow. So the same is true as adults. We don't grow in the way we wish to unless we accept change. And you were talking about the no right and wrong way. If there is a right way, it's whatever we feel comfortable with when we're meditating or praying or reaching out in a spiritual way, because I think that would be the bottom line, don't you?
Absolutely. We have within us the ability to be guided and directed if we would only allow it to happen. We have within us the ability to have courage in the face of difficulties and change. We have everything that we need within us. And of course, that's at the core of our philosophical teaching, that the resources that we need to empower, to guide, to direct, to move us to act and think and be the persons that we were called and created to be is always present within us. And if we would just allow that to come forth and give up some of the old negative thoughts and the negative thought patterns and change our way of thinking, it's kind of amazing to me how few people are willing to change their mind, because we think that there's something wrong if you change your mind. Well, in fact, what's wrong if you change your mind because you're led or guided or directed to change because it's the thing for you to do at this point in time? And anything that we do, we change our clothes, the weather changes, why not change our minds? And we do need to change our minds from time to time. And in your life and in my life, we've come to think differently about a lot of things that we thought differently about earlier in our lives. And as we move on, we're going to come to different understandings. So there's no problem with changing our minds.
Well, it's essential that we accept that, yes, change is essential and change is inevitable. And as we do that, we're living far more happily. And we can take the changes in the people around us, the changes in the lives of people, and it seems that we all go through phases where so many people are dying that we know. I know at one time a friend of mine said to my husband and me, my husband and I don't want to be your friends anymore because all your friends are dying. We're afraid to be your friends. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, every time we're together, you told me that someone else has died. And you know, when I thought about it, that was true. These things happen in groups and clumps, don't they? But we can accept that, yes, that is happening. And of course, she was kidding. But we can know that change is going to come about quickly and often, or we might go a long time without very great change in our lives, and we then seek change because we know inherently that change is essential for our soul's growth. And we're here for our soul's growth. We're here to remember, we're here for our soul's growth. And if we look at life in that way, it's more of an adventure, isn't it?
Life is an adventure. It's a positive and uplifting adventure. And the experiences of our life bring us the lessons that we need most. And whatever it is that comes back to us again and again is the lesson that we need to learn. And so as changes come into our lives, I think it's important for us to really take some time to look within and look at if an individual has a recurring change in their life, so especially a negative change. I think it's appropriate to take a look at one's life and decide, is this a lesson that I've not yet learned? And sometimes it takes some help to do that. Sometimes it takes the help of people around us, family, friends. Sometimes it takes professional help. But whatever it takes to understand that if we're in a negative cycle of negative change and negative experience, there's a reason for it. And it's not that we're being punished, and it's not that we've done something wrong, although our thinking maybe needs some adjustment.
And we have to realize that we sometimes don't have a choice. I know a young man whose wife is terminally ill, and I said to him, I just admire you so much because you have such courage. And he said, do I have a choice? And that was true. He had a choice to either be courageous or not. And so he doesn't know any other way than to, and isn't that wonderful?
That's a wonderful way to end the program. And somebody who demonstrates courage
Yes.
in the face of circumstance and situation. And we hope that the information that we've shared with you has been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.